Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly. Today, I am so excited to share with you a two-parter I have been percolating on and am very excited about. The Raven, Annabel Lee, The Bells, The Fall of the House of Usher. I could go on and on. If you don't know yet, we are going to discuss the life and death of the writer and prolific American poet Edgar Allan Poe. Lots of people assume they know exactly what happened to Poe and how it went when he died. And a lot of people would be wrong. There are so many theories about his death and details about his life that have been yet unexplained. But before I get way too excited, Sam, what's our question today?
All right. So last week we had the solar eclipse.
Yeah.
Did you get to check it out? And that's kind of really all my question is. Just cool life event. Were you able to check it out?
You know, it did happen, and I didn't check it out, actually, because I'm a party pooper. And I'm like, well, it's an eclipse, but there'll be another one. They always say it's going to be the last one, but there'll be another one. And I thought it wasn't going to be visible. I texted you, actually, I think. I thought it wasn't going to be visible where we were. I saw a map, and the track showed, southern Illinois.
That was for 100% coverage. Yeah.
Yeah, my brother-in-law traveled to Indiana to see the
really?
The coverage. Yeah. So I didn't do. Did you go out and see it?
Kind of. Yeah, I was at work. But most of the building kind of lined up outside.
Yeah.
And I work in a place that does a lot of not manufacturing, but just creating anything and everything, building anything.
Yeah.
And so we had extra welder's glass, and so they taped them onto paper plates. And we're standing outside in paper plates and welder's glass. Just watching the eclipse.
That's actually really smart. They were like, we got welder's glass, we're good.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah. There's another eclipse story. I know everybody in the universe texted me about it.
Right. It was cool. It wasn't as dark as I expected because we weren't directly in the line.
Right. Well, it seemed like this eclipse in general, of all the eclipses I've been a part of since 1991, it seems like this one, people were the most excited about it of any eclipse.
Well, it's because we don't get full coverage eclipses frequently. That's why it was such a big deal.
Oh, okay. Okay, because I was like, everybody I know is messaging me.
It's because that's what was rare about it. That's why they're saying this won't come back, is because this percentage of coverage we won't see again for 300 years. We'll have other eclipses for sure.
Right.
And it would have been a bigger deal, in my opinion, if we were directly in the path and you had that major difference.
I wish we would have been in the path.
Yeah, we weren't too far off.
I was jealous. You all already know this, that my family is from Cleveland because of Danny Green. And Cleveland was in the full, what was the correct
Oh, was
term?
it?
Full coverage, yes.
Just I say a path is what I've been referring to it as.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we were at 92. So we were pretty close.
Yeah, Cleveland was at full coverage. I actually had a friend who they let their whole office go early so they could go see the eclipse. Yeah. We
definitely had an unscheduled break in our building where the building just got quiet and you could see people going towards the doors.
Yeah, everybody's like, I have to go to my car. But
I glanced out the window of the cafeteria 10 minutes beforehand, and there were at least 30 people outside already ready to go.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that they just let them go. They were like, you don't have to come back to work. It's an eclipse. It'll be fun. They were like, sacrifice a half day of work. We're gonna, I was like, that's great.
I know a lot of schools canceled to give students the opportunity to go check it out.
See, that makes sense to me. Because if you're learning science and stuff, like, that's pretty, like, for people who are visual, like me, that's pretty incredible. You know, I would think schools, definitely.
Yeah, it was cool. Like I said, I do wish we were just a little bit more south, just to get the full 100%. Because it got kind of dark. It kind of felt like it suddenly got cloudy, and that was it. I would really love to experience like a full coverage eclipse at some point, but
yeah,
in all likelihood, that will not happen in my lifetime again.
Okay. Are we ready to dive in? Because I'm really excited. Okay, all right. So I've been percolating on this one for so long. Sam can tell you. I've been just highlighting and reading and just arranging and all of this to capture us a picture of Poe in the beginning. We're going to get a lot of flavors of his entire life here in this first episode. And we're going to discuss more of his later years and ultimate death in the second episode.
Yeah, I don't really know a whole lot about him. I haven't even read much of his work. Like I just kind of never really got around to it.
Girl, I love him. I don't know if you can tell. I love him. Annabel Lee is one of my favorite poems ever written.
I do remember, I think I was in the 4th grade, maybe. I had to do a shadow box project on a poem, and I chose Telltale Heart.
Another fantastic one. Oh, he's so good.
Yeah. And I was a 10-year-old making a shadow box to the Telltale Heart, but I loved it.
That is so awesome. And that alone here leads me to wonder how you have not read more Poe, because you're such a
I know, I just haven't. It's always been like, I know I should read Poe. I should, and I just never get around to it.
It's just you're spooky too. I'm like, girl, what? I thought we'd be spooky, but I'm happy because now I get to tell you all this stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about him.
Even if you had read about Poe, his Wikipedia article, an article online, kind of anything like that, it wouldn't be true. I'm gonna out him. It's not true. He was well known.
Oh, interesting.
He was well known to not divulge that. Or change it. I'll explain it. But even if you had read it, like the thing about Poe is so many people think they know what happened here. And there are so many things that could have happened here.
I know I've heard very, very little about his death, but I think I've heard how he was found. I think. I might be confusing it with another one, but from what I remember, it's like what I heard was like there were too many options to even like conclude anything. But there's a lot of weird factors with it.
We're gonna get like part 2 is gonna be like Theory City, because there are tons of things that have happened here. And I'll tell you something that I was going to include in the second episode, but I'm just going to say now. One of the Poe historians who works at the museum said that he had a patron one day who came up to him and said that all he knew about Edgar Allan Poe was that he was a drunk who died in the gutter. And the Poe historian had to say nothing, because of course he's a guest. But he said not a single word of that is true. There are so many options, including not implausibly a murder.
Yeah, I don't remember any details, so I'm excited to kind of get into that. But I do remember it's like it could be he was drunk. It could be a murder. It could be natural causes. It could be like, I just remember hearing it like that, where it's just like, it's you can't really determine it. Yeah. But there's a lot of different things that happened that kind of inspire that conversation.
There's so much going on, and there are so many people who are looking into it, and I'm glad they are. So just before we begin, I have to give credit to the primary source for my research on Poe's amazing life, and it is a book called A Mystery of Mysteries, The Life and Death of Edgar Allan Poe by Mark Dawidziak. Mark, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name. Your book was incredible. I am going to refer to Mr. Poe by either his last name Poe or Edgar throughout this episode. And in it, you will see why the author would have preferred this moniker. So even his full name is in question.
Oh.
And that is a huge theme we're going to see in Poe's life. Like I was just saying, the thing about him was that he was a writer, of course. However, writers tend toward embellishment. We'll see that many of Poe's biographies, quote, written by himself, are highly inaccurate.
See, that's just like an old, like, that's the original troll.
Yes. So inaccurate. Like,
he's doing it himself. It's to mess with people.
Yes. Absolutely, it's to mess with people. Wait till you hear some of this stuff in here. You're going to love it because it's absolutely to screw with everyone.
Oh, that's funny.
And and that's just another thing. Highly inaccurate. And that one's Poe. But then here's another thing that we're going to talk about, which was another aspect that looms over Poe, is the ever-present spirit of what became a caricature. The morose, depressed, angry loner. This is also not entirely inaccurate. Poe had several reasons for behaving in this manner, and it was certainly true some of the time. However, there are several written accounts from friends, acquaintances, employers, and the public that state that Poe tended to be an affable character. He was often seen puttering in his garden and was a very athletic and healthy young man. They all emphasized what a hard worker he was and a prolific writer. Another thing, it's just not, it's, people think, you know, you see, and I'll talk about it in the second part, you see the daguerreotypes of him. And they were taken well into his life. He was nearing death when the daguerreotypes were taken. So he does look morose.
Right.
But that was not his nature.
That's just what it really kind of became known for.
Yeah, it's a photo. Like, would you want your photo to be like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, oh, there's Kelly with her 6 chins. I guess that must have been how she was.
Right, like that's all that people can ever imagine you as in that one moment.
Exactly. Scott Peoples, a College of Charleston professor and author of The Man in the Crowd, Edgar Allan Poe and the City, is quoted as saying, "It is a fundamental misconception to confuse Poe with his narrators. Even with illustrations of the Raven, the narrator is drawn to look like Poe." I thought that was very interesting language. Fundamental misconception.
Yeah.
He's so different that it's fundamentally a misconception.
Well, it even feel like, just putting it in kind of today's terms, I feel like it'd be hard for some people to also kind of have that realization of like, because, you know, just like parasocial relationships nowadays, people don't always understand that like whoever you're seeing on Instagram or on YouTube or whatever can be completely different people than what you see socially on the apps.
Yeah.
And this kind of feels like the same thing where it's like what he is putting out as an image to people is different than who he is.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. But there's there is a difference between the two, and acknowledging the difference is important if you're going to have an actual relationship with that person.
Right. If you're actually going to understand the body of work that he did, and I'll talk about it a little bit more here too, because I spent a good chunk of time talking about, of course, his writing, and it it narrows your perception of Poe so much for you just to think that he's the guy who wrote The Raven, because he was so versatile. He was such a good writer. Like, you'll see his defendants and his friends and like the stuff that comes out. He was a fantastic writer. He was not just this parasocial relationship you have of a goth guy because you feel sad, which is right. Okay. It's okay. But that he was, for a time in his life, a very happy, affable man. He did have a lot of tragedy happen to him. So yeah, sometimes he was morose and depressed, and
that's natural.
That happens. Because another absolute travesty is that throughout Poe's life, whenever he was at a point where some good fortune seemed imminent, things invariably fell apart because of bad luck, bad timing, or a self-destructive outburst.
Which I think also all kind of go hand in hand with each other as well.
Yeah, the only thing that is a bummer is like bad luck, bad timing. It's like, oh man, like maybe he wrote some of the best stuff and it just wasn't the right time, and now we'll never hear it, you know?
Right.
But then also the self-destructive outburst thing is just as true.
Well, like what I mean by like they all kind of go hand in hand is like the first two often can lead to the third.
Yes. And we will see that Poe is wont to a self-destructive outburst, and that didn't come from nowhere. But those are just some of the themes about Poe that are over-exaggerated by his enduring reputation as a great American writer, and we're going to see some more. Let's start with a big theme in his life that is in fact true, but again, very heavily characterized, and that is, of course, Poe's fondness for the bottle.
Yeah, so that's one thing I did know.
Yes, and just like the young man said at the museum, I knew he died drunk in a gutter. That's documented. It's all true. I was telling Sam before we recorded this that one of my favorite parts about doing this episode, doing this research, is because Poe was a writer, so much survives and so much is dated, and the people who knew him somehow as well, their correspondence and all that survives and is it's so great. And so it survives that he was, in fact, a drinker. Most are positive that he was wasted all the time and died in the gutter because he was a chronic alcoholic. But in fact, there is a spirited, still carried on debate between Poe scholars, and I Googled this. It is a group too numerous to call out, as there are so many organizations of academics who've devoted their careers to Poe.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I just thought you could be like a Poe scholar and there was like a society. No, there's like 10 different groups, numerous organizations.
It's like you're dedicating your life's work to researching this.
Right. And I don't know why I didn't think like I just thought they'd be all under an umbrella, I guess. They'd all meet one day at the bus stop and be like, don't you love Poe? Like, no, there's like 10 organizations. So when I say like Poe scholars.
It's like a Facebook meetup.
Right,
Poe fans.
Yeah. And so when I say Poe scholars, what I mean is somebody who has devoted their academic career to the study of Poe, and I can't really give you a perfectly specific organization that particular scholar belongs to. But it's a still carried on debate between them in 2024 on how much alcohol Poe was drinking and how often. What is documented is that Poe was known to be thrown quickly into a state of inebriation from just a small amount of drink. And this comes from his classmates at the University of Virginia. So they saw him.
So as if he was a lightweight?
Correct.
Or...
Yes. I didn't want to... I almost wrote in the script, like, so he was a lightweight. Yes. Yes.
Well, just like... I was kind of thinking earlier, I know very little about his life. What I told you earlier about what I know about his death is the extent of it. Like, this is all new to me. As you were kind of just going through this, I was thinking, like, what if he was playing it up and not actually drunk as much as people thought he was, as part of that character that he would portray himself to be on occasion?
I don't know. I think he was often pretty drunk because of all the witness counts and because of the true, I mean, we're going to cover it, a small amount of it today, a lot of it in part 2, the true amount of misery that he went through. And if just a small amount can cause you to be that inebriated, you can probably be drunk a lot.
But you think you'd build a tolerance to it, which is why I was thinking, like, if he was a lightweight and that's what his buddies are saying, then how much was he really drinking?
Exactly. Hence the spirited debate.
Well, that's why I'm like, was he faking it because there were witness accounts of seeing him drunk? Like, was that part of a character? I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah, and what I can tell you is, I would put this in part 2, but it fits here too, is that at least later in his life, there are many issues. You know, we're in the 1800s. We're dealing with a lot of very contagious diseases and fatal diseases. And many, I shouldn't say many, some doctors thought that Poe was in an advanced state of an illness that we'll talk about that had caused lesions on his brain, making the alcohol more potent on him.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so because with this, Kelly, why are you hiding? With tuberculosis.
Okay, which is common at that time.
Yes, and unfortunately, another theme in Poe's life. And with tuberculosis, you can develop latent tuberculosis and have these lesions for years and years of your life and never know it.
Oh, wow.
So that's another thought that they're positing, that he may already, by the time he's at the university, have had these on his brain, and that made the alcohol really bad. And his classmates also said that it caused more than just the standard hangover and had, quote, a devastating effect on his system and his psyche, end quote.
Oof.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound fun.
No. So we can posit then that if Poe, I mean, even if he was acting drunk, or we can assume he didn't like it, I think. And I think that's true of a lot of alcoholics. Like, you don't love it.
Right.
You know?
Well, it's an addiction. Even if you hate it, it's something that your body is wanting.
Yeah, it needs it.
It's tricking you to have it. And I get that too with, like, also not, like, if you, well, not, I'm not much of an alcohol person in general, but, like, I get the devastating hangovers. Like, that's a big reason I don't drink. I'll get a migraine and I'm down and out, and it's like I'm worthless. The night of alcohol is not worth it to me.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to me that, like, even with, like, a devastating hangover, you keep doing it. Because for me, it was like, okay, I'm good. I'm done. I don't need this anymore.
No, I turned 30 and the hangovers were so punishing. I was like, I'll miss you, Jameson. I loved you all my life.
Well, my hangover is, like, from the moment, because I didn't start drinking until I was already into college. But even though the first moment starting to drink, I was like, no, I'm good. I don't
Yeah.
This hurts.
This tastes bad.
Like, it's not even, it's just like in the morning it hurts too much. And I'm a morning person. I am up early every morning. And I'm like, in college, it's my favorite thing to like wake up, go get my laundry done, get my homework done before the rest of my friends are up for the day.
Right, right. Just get that all done.
And having a migraine really makes that difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, and hangovers are just already so punishing. But they're quoting that it's his whole system in his psyche. So he's
that's interesting.
Depressed and doesn't like it clearly that this is happening. And here I'm going to introduce editor and poet Rufus Griswold. Now, Poe was said by many to be abrasive and make enemies easily. That was a little later in his life. We're going to talk more about when he was a child and a teen. But once he was past teenagehood to his mid-20s to 30s, he was good at making an enemy. And I'm saying that straight up. And I don't know what Griswold's problem was. Like, I don't know, but this guy he was a nasty, nasty man to Poe, and maybe it was mutual, but after Poe was already gone and unable to defend himself, Griswold added the label that Poe was a drug addict. It should be noted that this accusation comes with no foundation or justification at all, but it became an enduring part of this character that Poe has become in death.
It's just like holding a grudge for too long.
Yeah, you're gonna call somebody a drug, and not just that. In death, you're gonna that to me is the part that is so messed up. Is in this person cannot rest without you coming back, because just as many are going to influence his legacy of other untruths Griswold published in the newspapers in the wake of Poe's death. Don't worry, he comes back and he's just as hateful. And we're mixing death and life a little here. But here's where it gets fun. Because Charles Baudelaire, a great champion of Poe, entered the chat and dragged Griswold to filth.
See, this is just drama. Like,
drama.
This is what like the reality shows are nowadays.
Yes, except it's Baudelaire. Like, right. and he's not the only one whose name is going to pop up in here that you're like, oh, shit. But he was a great champion of Poe. And so when Griswold published this, it was an obituary. He said all this nasty, horrible shit in an obituary and in following articles.
Oh, wow.
Baudelaire ain't having it, and I love it. Quote, Griswold's ongoing campaign of character assassination was the crass and hateful work of a pedagogic vampire, he said. Adding in a slam dunk, quote, does there not exist in America an ordinance to keep dogs out of cemeteries?
Oh, that's funny.
I read that and I was like, oh, shit! Yes!
Well, this is like an episode that we're gonna. It's not out yet. It'll be out after this. But we read a court, just a snippet of somebody from the newspaper witnessing a court scene, and it was written in such an incredible way. I feel like this is the same sort of thing where it's like it's just written in a way that people don't write anymore. And I want to read this in the newspaper. Exactly.
Oh, you're going to hear a lot of ways people don't talk anymore because I quote a lot. Because like I said, there are so many witness-written things that live documenting Poe. But they're all written in the old English style. But I just thought it was the sickest burn I ever heard. Is there not an ordinance to keep dogs out of cemeteries? That's
I do like that.
Good. Getting back to Poe's life and his true passion, writing, He thought it was important for a writer to display diversity in genres of writing and show you could write in any manner of form. The true Poe considered himself first and foremost a poet. To the literary circles, Poe was best known in his lifetime as first a tremendously tough critic of all writing. He was employed by newspapers to read ya.
Oh, really?
Yes. And in these literary circles, so he's sort of already being belittled a little bit, that in these literary circles, he's first seen as a critic, and then it's said he's seen as a poet, and then it says he's seen as an author of mystery and horror. So, like, those three things are really what they're, they're not really giving any credence much to his writing, mostly to his work as a critic. And so we can see how Poe was always sort of an outsider in these, quote, literary salons and societies. And they were thrown by very fancy ladies, things like that. And which is unfortunately another sad reminder of being an outsider in other areas of his life.
Right.
Poe and Twain scholar Dennis Eddings said, quote, "The popular image of Poe is so far off the mark that it borders on ludicrous. Poe had a delicious sense of humor. He loved cats, a true test of character, as Mark Twain recognized. And he took his art seriously, and at the same time, he made fun of it. Surely a sign of a well-balanced mind," end quote.
Sounds like a cool dude.
Yeah, so from all these facts, we can glean that he was a fun man and a good writer. What a terrible feeling it must have been to be excluded from that upper echelon of writing.
Right.
The parties are the reason it was so hard for me to date is that they were taking place all the time, and he was constantly excluded from them all the time. So I was like, it could have been any time in his 20s or his 30s or maybe even younger.
Yeah, early 1800s.
Like I just said, we can all glean that he was a fun man and a good writer. And I'm about to tell you how good a writer. Because, well, he also wrote stories that would later influence science fiction writers. And almost all the greats have called him out. Ray Bradbury saying that he, quote, fell under his spell and, quote, his call was irresistible, end quote. Other names citing him as an influence include Bloch and Lovecraft, but by far the biggest name being Stephen King.
I think all those are big names.
He didn't deserve to get, it was, we'll talk about it more too. Again, it's a class thing. It's a class thing that he was excluded. And it's such a shame because these are the biggest names who all cite him as an inspiration. Hal Poe, no relation to the writer from what the book tells us, says, quote, "The real Poe was the life of the party, witty, clever, engaging. He would bring his flute, and he and his wife Virginia would perform duets. Poe loved humor, but he had no great love for the horror story, even though he excelled at it. He was courtly, and he had a lot of friends, despite what Griswold wrote." Here we see another misconception about Poe that is so radicalized about his character, horror wasn't even his preferred genre.
I feel like we totally could have been friends, but I would have wanted him to be into horror based on his writing. But I think that also shows so much talent. If it's not something you're personally interested in, but you can excel at it, like that's natural talent involved in that.
Yeah, and I think that feeling that you have is supernatural, and I have a good quote that'll maybe make you feel a little bit like, okay,
Well, that's also like the parasocial thing too. It's like, it's okay that if you're not in the same stuff, like, no, that's fine.
But it's true that it wasn't his preferred genre, but he's still very spooky and does like writing it. And I have another, the quote is like the next slide. Except for, also, we have another defender in the Griswold bashing doing the good work out here, and I appreciate that.
Right.
And the book shares, and I think it's important to mark, quote, "We don't lose Poe, the horror writer, by disposing of the cartoon image of him and accepting that he had a lively sense of humor and an exacting work ethic. Indeed, by acknowledging the complete artist, we better understand why and how he could take horror to such sublime and terrifying heights." End quote.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, because we've touched on it already, and I think we've probably touched on it in a couple other episodes, but I have fairly strong opinions on how to treat parasocial relationships. And I think this is just like, obviously this isn't one, but it is like the perfect like mapping of one.
Yeah.
Obviously that didn't exist in the early 1800s, but it really is.
But didn't it? Yeah. I feel like it kind of did. I feel like this is definitely a parasocial relationship.
It really feels like it. And I personally have strong feelings about, like, you don't know that person. Like, right. You don't. You can like what they're creating, and you can feel like you relate to it, and you can feel that like friendly nature in it, and that's why they create it, right? Like, that's the whole point. But when it comes to like everyday life, you don't know that person.
No.
And I think that there's something really special in that also, like, because if you ever get the privilege of meeting somebody that you want to, you're kind of meeting a new person. Right. And I think that's a good thing. I think that separation is really important.
Yeah.
And it's nice to hear things like this where it's like, he wasn't just that. Like, there was so much more to him. And let me tell you what it is. And it's documented, and people talked about it.
People wrote it down. You know how I love to write shit down.
Yeah, I think that separation's very important, and it's good to hear. I like stories like that.
The separation was so intense. He could write The Cask of Amontillado and then love cats and have Mark Twain be like, yeah, that's a mark of a good person.
Right? Yeah, like people like you and me, for example, like, we have different just like visual aesthetics. We're two different people. Mm-hmm. But people learn about like things that you're into where they're just like, no way. Like, that's not possible. And then vice versa, other way around. But you and I are into the same exact thing. Like, that's kind of how I look at all of this, is like that difference and is so important. But that similarities is also so important. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if I'm talking in circles, but it's just something I feel strongly about. And I just feel like I see it a lot where like people are complaining about those parasocial relationships and like how people contract them online and all of that. It's something where it's like, it's reason that I want to keep some anonymity with us doing the show.
Yeah, I think and I know we're not here to talk about parasocial relationships.
I know, it's just, this went off on a tangent, but it's interesting.
But I can talk about them, and I think that they're dangerous, and they lead to maybe more stalker cases. I can't back that up with any data.
I think they can. I also think they could be a good thing. It can be that person that you relate to in a time of struggle, even though it is one-sided, it can be a really great thing. It's just kind of what level do you take it to?
Exactly. Yes.
Sorry, I just totally took that on a tangent, but
no,
it made sense.
No, it's going to make even more sense too, because there's a lot of stuff like that here. There's a lot of it. Oh, we talked about the daguerreotypes, which we'll talk a little more about in part 2. But what if you say you passed Poe in his prime? He would be in the streets of Philadelphia in about like 1841. We'll give it that year. And this Poe would be slim and robust and without his iconic mustache, but with the in-style sideburns. And this is how he looked most of his adult life.
Just like probably like normal guy walking down the street.
And you just think about the most reproduced images of him, and he constantly has that mustache. And he only had it when the daguerreotypes are taken at the end of his life. He mostly never walked around that way.
Huh. But it's such an iconic image now.
It is. He looked spry and robust when he wrote some of his best horror stories. So, like I said, yes, age took a toll on Poe, as it will on all of us, but he was known to be spry. He also would have introduced himself as Edgar Poe or Edgar A. Poe, rarely including the Allan in signatures and bylines. Again, this will become more clear as we carry on with the story.
It just sounds so good together.
It does, but you will understand why he doesn't like it.
It just, maybe it's like one of those things, like serial iconic. Killers, they'll get their third name.
Yeah, well, and
as they become well known.
Yeah, and his name is so iconic that it feels so odd. Like, this is the first time I've read this book and researched this deep. It feels so odd to see it without the Allan in there, or without that. It's become an iconic name. But the author himself would absolutely probably have left out Allan. These are realities, though confirmed by witnesses, and a lot of the rest is mythology. His appearance, his disheveled clothing, his uncombed hair, wandering around, that's the mythology. A witness of this is able to tell you he was just a normal guy.
Yeah.
In the place of this reality, we have a distorted character of Poe, possibly mad, spinning out his iconic writings under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Due in part to Griswold, this view has done incalculable harm to the writer and the brilliance of his process. The real reality is that he was the opposite of this funhouse mirror version. He was trying to create a stable and steady home and family life, and he was certainly trying in every way he could to make his living as a professional writer.
So you've kind of alluded to it already, but was he a very successful writer during his lifetime, or did his success for the majority come after his death?
Sadly, the majority of his success came after his death. Poe scholar and former National Park Service ranger who regularly patrolled the Poe House in Philadelphia, Helen McKenna Uff, makes the great point, quote, "They actually want him to be crazy, twisted, and horrible. He was none of those things. Yet nobody really likes the idea of Poe being a careful writer dedicated to art and craft, which is just such a horrible shame." And I know I'm harping on that, but that's yet another person.
Yeah, you're able to, your brain as a fan of his work is able to wrap around these dark themes, but you're not dark and twisted. Why does he have to be?
Right. Why? Yeah. And why don't you like the idea of him being a careful writer dedicated to art?
Yeah.
Why would you rather, extrapolate on the darkest periods of his life? Like I said in our intro, Poe was given to embellishing his biography, so it doesn't make it easy to find out how he lived.
I think that's so funny.
Yeah, you'll see how bad it is. The Poe scholars who were interviewed for Mystery of Mysteries had to perform essentially what they called, quote, literary forensics, studying Poe's work and personality to form a close to true picture, and they were called on as expert witnesses for the book. It's often less a matter of what we know through actual hard evidence and more a matter of settling for what we think we know about Poe at all.
It sounds like they were essentially profiling him to figure out his personality.
Mm-hmm. And, quote, that's true of his death in spades, but it's also true of his life, said Jeffrey A. Savoy, the secretary and treasurer of the Edgar Allan Poe Society in Baltimore. We accept a lot of information about Poe, but for a lot of it, we don't really have a way of verifying whether it's true or not. It's so obscured in mystery that an autobiographical note Poe composed in May 1841, he opened with the words, born January 1811. He started out with the fairly white lie of shaving 2 years off his age. And that was because Poe shared an interest with Puff writers in the idea to create a more romantic and dramatic image for the public. So he was doing all this plus completely fabricating for his public.
I think that's so funny to me. He was like the first troll, and I love it.
And although this even you're right. Although this was clearly what Poe wanted, many of the specious elements found their way into his obituaries and early biographies.
Whoops.
It took decades after Poe's death to nail down the year he was born just from that small white lie.
It's so harmless in reality of everything. I'm sure it drove people absolutely nuts.
Oh, yeah.
But it is a harmless prank. And it's so funny to me.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Oh, it's so funny. And it's like a little thing. And people are like, spent decades like, I gotta know.
Like, I understand like wanting to get it right and be historically accurate. But as somebody who's like casually listening to this and like, I would read a book like you did, I wouldn't be diving into it as much. That's really funny.
Yeah.
From my perspective, that's really funny.
Yeah. It took them decades just to figure out when he was born. And he was probably like so satisfied.
Right.
So the verifiable truth is that Edgar Poe was born in Boston on January 19th, 1809. He was the second child of David Poe Jr. and Elizabeth Eliza Arnold Hopkins Poe, who were both actors. In his, quote, unreliable but intriguing autobiographical sketch, Poe claimed his family was, quote, one of the oldest and most respectable in Baltimore, end quote.
I'm assuming this isn't true.
This was at best an exaggeration, and at worst a lie. His family did settle in Baltimore, but it hardly qualified as one of the city's oldest.
I'll say, was his family originally from Boston? Because he was born in Boston, so he wouldn't be one of the oldest families.
Yeah, he was born in Boston. Another big theme, Poe has a lot of themes. Another big theme is that Poe moves. He moves everywhere. Like, we'll hear about it in part 2 a lot, that I can't believe he's carrying these wives all over the country.
Oh, wow.
He moves so much. But yes, he was born in Boston. His great-grandfather and wife immigrated to Pennsylvania around 1750 from Ireland. It wasn't until 1755 that Poe's family moved to Baltimore.
Okay.
In Poe's continued yarn, it says, you'll like this, Sam. We know some of these people. It says that his paternal grandfather, General David Poe, quote, was quartermaster general in the Maryland line during the Revolution and the intimate friend of Lafayette, who, during his visit to the U.S., called personally on Lafayette's widow and tendered her his warmest acknowledgments for the services rendered him by her husband.
How interesting.
And knowing Poe, was this another lie? Another surprise, this story is largely true. David Poe Sr. held the rank of major during the American Revolution, though he commonly used and was known by the courtesy title of general. So, he was. He served as the Deputy Quartermaster General of Baltimore during the war. That's exactly what Poe said his position was.
Well, Poe's being smart about this, though. You can't tell only lies.
Yeah, you gotta, yeah.
No, Poe knows what he's doing.
Yeah. You just stir in a couple true things, and yeah, he was he was the Deputy Quartermaster General of Baltimore. What the book does not elaborate on is if there is any truth to his relationship with General Lafayette, or if the story that he paid his respects to Lafayette's widow is true.
Yeah, you just gotta mix them all up to make it more difficult to figure out your lies.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Why would you want anyone to figure it out easily?
Yeah, he's playing a mind game with people. You got to do it right.
Well, yeah, and he's like, I want to be a mystery, and I respect that.
Oh, I absolutely respect that. I think that's great.
So after the war, the general operated a dry goods business in Baltimore. His firstborn son and namesake, David Poe Jr., was born July 18th, 1784, and he hoped the boy would become a lawyer. However, it didn't exactly work out the way the general planned. David and his friends instead formed a thespian club, meeting each week to read and perform plays for themselves and occasional guests.
Yeah, why not? That sounds fun.
It sounds like fun. I'm totally into it. However, I understand that the general probably...
right. He wasn't as big of a fan of it.
Yeah, I'm sure the general probably wasn't thrilled with the meeting each week in his house. But it might be easy then to see how Poe became so theatrical and artistic.
Oh, yeah. Once you said his parents were actors, it immediately was like, okay, I get it. I see how he's creating this whole image for himself and where he was inspired to do so. I get it.
And when David saw a play in Virginia featuring the actress Eliza Arnold Hopkins, he was said to be smitten with her. And David made his stage debut on December 1st, 1803. Eliza was from a theater family herself. So, they didn't mind the thespian club. Both her parents had appeared at London's Covent Garden Theatre.
Ooh.
She was born in the spring of 1787. We don't have a more specific date there.
Okay.
We do, unfortunately, have more specific dates here. And after her mother was widowed, she moved with her daughter to the United States, to Boston, on January 3rd, 1796.
Okay.
Tragically, by 11, Eliza had lost both parents. Her mother, who brought her to the United States, had fallen ill with yellow fever as a likely cause.
Yeah, it's kind of the time of that.
Again, yeah, it's the time. Infectious diseases, they become fatal. And you end up with, again, another theme: orphans, orphan children. So as time passes, Eliza gets married. However, David Poe saw a good deal of Eliza and her husband throughout the rest of 1804. And then the next year, her husband fell ill, also likely with yellow fever.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Poor Eliza, right?
Right.
I'm telling you, a ton of the people in this story I feel terrible for. So her husband, also likely with yellow fever, falls ill, and he dies in October 1805.
Wow. So they know each other because of the play that David debuted in 1803, or they just know each other because they're both actors like in the same industry.
The second one.
Okay. I just want to make sure I have it right.
No, you're not wrong, though. He saw her in a play. He just wasn't in the play. He
Okay.
later, though, was inspired by that to make his stage debut. So he saw her in a play for the first time, and then they knew each other because they were both actors.
Yeah, it's a kind of a small world type of thing.
Yes, yeah. And so they would run into each other and that kind of thing. And so when her husband dies, and I think it's incredibly sad, he was just 20 years old.
Oh wow,
He
very
died
young.
of yellow fever. And that makes Eliza widowed at 18 years old.
Yeah, very young.
Yeah. However, soon after, David began to court her. And they were married by spring 1806.
Oh, a few months.
Yeah. And they made Boston their home base for 3 years. So the smitten love reaction of David seeing her on stage had clearly lasted.
Right.
On January 30th, 1807, the two welcomed a son, William Henry Leonard. His birth was cited as a healing factor for a rift between David and his own father.
Oh.
Yeah. And just like his son Edgar, David Poe had a type. Eliza was described as having raven black hair, large luminous eyes, a fair complexion, a round and delicate but full figure. Edgar would marry many women who bore a striking resemblance.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes. I have to count the number of women that looked like this that he married.
Oh boy, you have to like count?
Yeah.
Wow. There has to be quite a few then.
In my personal opinion, though, there's only one that he really loved, and we'll talk about her in part 2. So, David Poe did not receive much good reception for his acting. And something that is shitty is that he was all resentful because Eliza was a star. They loved her. They thought she was a wonderful actress.
Jealousy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And mirroring his son, he was said to be hypersensitive with a hair trigger temper.
That's a hard industry to be in with that.
Yes. Yes. With if you're hypersensitive in theater, it's a really bad. Listen, you guys, I'm sure I've mentioned it. I got a theater degree. If you're hypersensitive, I recommend business majoring.
Yeah, like that. That's even if business is hard when you're hypersensitive, but
yeah.
Theater is one of the worst industries to be in when it comes to that.
Yeah, because wait till you hear what would happen. He also would threaten to attack the critics who lambasted him.
Yeah, that's not okay.
He would loudly insult audiences who hissed and booed his performances. And he would also be a drinker.
See, when you're interacting with an audience like that, you're just perpetuating their behavior.
Right.
Like, it just becomes a vicious cycle. Like, that's why the industry isn't a good thing for somebody who has to deal with that sort of stuff.
Right. Like, if you're going to loudly insult them after they boo you, do you think you're going to suddenly win them to your side?
Yeah, or like none of the critics are going to want to deal with you if you're threatening them.
No, you're threatening them. Yes, this man was, I mean, a hair trigger temper, truly. And truly, it mirrors his son a lot. And you'll be surprised by the end of this paragraph how much Edgar mirrors David Poe with what happens. So, following their third theatrical season in Boston, the Poes moved to New York, beginning a run at the Park Theater. So again, we've moved. This is unacceptable.
Not terribly far, but a first move.
When I was reading this book, the amount of moving upset me so much. I was like, oh my God, I could never. This is like the 18th time they've moved.
Oh boy.
They began a run at the Park Theater. However, David would turn into a depressing case of different city, same story, and reviews.
Yeah, like the changing the city isn't going to change that temper.
No. Or make you a better actor.
Yeah.
Sorry, man. Sorry, man. And he continued to drink. And after 6 weeks of this, he left New York Theater Company and theater totally.
Probably a good decision.
And then here's the part that is eerie that Poe would mirror him. Because he eventually would leave his wife and children. But precisely when is unknown.
Yeah. And it's kind of like a part of I guess this episode will come out after, but a nature versus nurture conversation. Where it's like, is this kind of like in his nature because it was in his father's nature, or did his father kind of instill that in him, whether it was consciously or subconsciously?
And yeah, just these traits that he has somehow picked up, even maybe barely knowing his father. Because again, the precise date is just not there.
Right. But it's even just like you hear stories later. Like if Eliza mentioned it, that like, oh yeah, your father left, then that is training him and teaching him that behavior potentially could be acceptable.
Right. Correct. And we'll see, it's not just David Poe doing damage and creating this mirror of poor behavior or poor habits. And we'll talk about it a little more in a little bit. But there are people around Poe who are creating these habits. And even more screwed up is that, so the date is precisely unknown, but a daughter, Rosalie, was born in December, although the precise date is unrecorded. So it's potentially possible he could have left her while she was pregnant.
Oh, yeah. And who knows if he knew, but that's absolutely terrible, especially if he knew and chose to leave a pregnant mother.
Yeah, he's a scrub. And it's in doubt if David Poe was present for Rosalie's birth. And if he hadn't already deserted the family, he soon would, is what the book said. Yeah. Scrub. Little is known about the care of the Poe children while Eliza was trying to keep going as a single mother.
Yeah, it can't be easy because this is
she kept going. Yeah.
Three child?
Yes, she has 3 children. Yes. Third. And Rosalie was only just born.
Yeah, that has to be so hard.
Yes, it must be so hard, but it makes me respect her so much because she's gonna keep going. Like,
good for her.
We'll talk about it a little bit too. And it's a time period once again where this is not common unless you're a widow,
right?
To be a single mother and have to support.
Divorce
children.
Definitely wasn't really a thing.
No,
at this point, this is early 1800s.
Yeah, though the memories being recalled are decades old. The Poe children, for instance, were described as both, quote, very pretty and lively and playful, though, quote, thin, pale, and very fretful. So I just included this because I wanted to make mention of the fact that these three kids were good kids. And even though they're decades old memories, they remember them being good kids. And they didn't deserve their scrub of a father to leave them. And they also didn't deserve what happens next, which is what I talked to you about, the people introducing habits into Poe's life. Because again, Eliza is a single mother. So stories exist of an elderly nurse quieting the children by feeding them, quote, liberally with bread-soaked gin, where they soon fell asleep, end quote.
Yeah. Obviously, this is awful, absolutely awful, but I don't think it was uncommon.
It's not, but it gets worse. And also, it's just, for me, the thing that pings is you're introducing alcohol to him.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely terrible. Like, absolutely terrible to do. But I don't think people understood that at that point.
I don't think so either, but it absolutely was common, but it does get worse because she also admitted that, quote, from the very birth of the girl, freely administered to them through gin and liquors, sometimes laudanum, to put them to sleep when restless.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah.
You can't do that. I know it's the 1800s, but please stop.
Yeah, these could all be factors in Poe's addictions.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It's the 1800s, but obviously the alcohol. But laudanum is an opiate tincture, and it's also known to contain morphine and codeine.
Yeah, they definitely didn't know that much about laudanum at the time, but it's still just, it's awful.
Yeah, they did know it contained alcohol and opium.
Yeah, but there's just a different view.
Yeah.
On all of that. But, like, it still is, like, it's hard to hear. Because we know how terrible it is.
Because especially perturbing about this, the fact, first of all, it's an admission. She said it. And she said from the very birth of the girl.
It's so young. Like, you're forcing addictions at that point. You're making them happen.
Yeah, from her very birth? Like, Jesus. So, Eliza, like I said, respect and love her. She continued her stage career to great reviews. But by the summer of 1811, it was clear to all who saw her that something was terribly wrong.
Uh-oh.
She looked gaunt and ill. After continuing to play roles while ill, Eliza died on December 8th, which she kept playing, she kept acting. She was dying, and she kept, I just respect that so much. I respect that so much.
December 8th is not a good day. That's the same day John Lennon was murdered.
Right? Yep. I learned that from you.
Yeah, my grandfather also died on the same day. It's not a good day. We don't like December 8th.
Yeah, no. The cause most often given for death is tuberculosis.
Again, the time of it all.
Yep. And the first signs of which had appeared at an earlier performance. However, they didn't give more details on that, like which signs appeared and like how they were noticed in the performance. Right. But again, like I said, it can be latent. And
aren't there like quite a few different potential signs where it's like there could have been a lot of possibilities?
Yes. And we're also, again, for the millionth time, we're in that time frame where we have these symptoms presenting that could be a ton of different stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't know that it's very serious. So it was December 8th, and Eliza died at just 24 years old.
Oh, that's so young.
I know. And whether or not her boys, William and Edgar, watched her die, they certainly watched her dying.
Yeah.
Edgar was thought to be a delicate child, and the process would have been intensely personal and up close. They lived in cramped quarters, and he would have seen coughing up blood, hemorrhaging, and the wasting away that would return to haunt him again and again in his life. So Edgar was only 3, and
I was
he
going to
was
say, he would have only been 2 or 3, right?
yes, correct.
So hopefully that doesn't have lasting memories, but it could have lasting psychological effects.
I think it haunts him quite a bit because it happens to many, many, many people in his life, sadly. Eliza is just one of the first. We've already been talking about it, And so Edgar was only 3, and he was surrounded by 4 possible causes that would be given for his own death.
Oh, yeah.
Drink, drugs, poverty, and tuberculosis.
Yeah, it's kind of another theme throughout everything.
Yeah, as much as he embellished, Edgar always spoke of his mother and her standing in theater with great pride and truth.
Oh, so, I like that. Like,
I wanted
it could be very hard, but
yes,
it's nice to hear that.
Yes, yeah. He always spoke of her with much pride, and unfortunately, it's just tuberculosis is so contagious and insidious, and he is exposed to it now at only 3 years old.
Yeah.
And we'll see going throughout his life that he is exposed several times to tuberculosis. But again, there is argument on whether or not that caused his death. After her death, Edgar was given a miniature portrait of his mother and a few of her letters. She was the first woman in his life he idealized that he would lose. As has been noted by many a Poe scholar and biographer, frail but strong-willed women who die young figure in many of his stories and poems.
That makes sense.
Yeah, including my favorite, Annabel Lee.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, though.
And it gets worse, you guys. I'm sorry. The most pressing question after Eliza's death was what would happen to her 3 orphan children. William Henry Leonard was taken by David Poe's parents in Baltimore. Rosalie, just a year old, was taken in immediately by a Richmond merchant. Edgar then became the foster child of a Richmond couple known for their benevolence, John and Frances Franny Allen.
It's interesting that, like, I guess, again, this kind of just goes back to what we've been saying is early 1800s, but, like, the kids are all separated.
I come back to that saying they'd split all of these siblings.
Yeah, they're so young.
He lost his mother. His father left. They separated him from his siblings. Some to other states, some to family.
Yeah.
And family didn't take him. I don't understand.
Yeah, see, like, with family not taking them all.
I can understand Rosalie. She was very young and, like, adoptable. Like, people wanted a baby. But if you were going to take William, why wouldn't you take Edgar as well? They're both older boys who could help you around the house and stuff like that. But they don't. So that's another mystery and sad. Because we're going to see, again, this is John Allan. And if we recall, Poe did not like to have the name Allan. So John and Franny had Edgar baptized on January 7th, 1812, with themselves as godparents, which is how he acquired the middle name Allan. Is that
how it used to work with godparents? Or is that just something they did?
I think that's just something they did.
So I never knew that, but I also, like, am not a religious person, so I'm like, I don't know if I would know that.
I'm Catholic, so it's like your middle name is usually like a family name and then a patron saint. So I'm not sure. I think that they just did it because they were like, we're the Allens and now you're an Allan or whatever.
Right.
But we'll see that's... Edgar was tragically destined for more misfortune as his foster father did not take an immediate liking to him. And it is known Fanny was the one who genuinely took a fancy to him.
He's a 3-year-old boy. He just needs people to care for him.
Exactly. Although he believed in helping the poor and hungry, Allan despised dependency, which he saw as weakness of character.
He's a 3-year-old boy. He's dependent.
Yeah, and listen to this shit. Allan was himself an orphan who greatly benefited from others' help and support. But he viewed himself as a self-made man and was fond of quoting proverbs about piety, fortitude, and perseverance.
Yeah, you didn't become a self-made man at 3 years old.
No. And you were also an orphan who needed help once.
Yeah.
And he was also, Allan, was also a cautious man, and that seems evident in a calculated decision to never formally adopt Edgar. Nor was Poe regarded as Allan's son and heir.
That just makes it, like, I can't imagine what he mentally had to be going through. Even at the age of 3. Like, your father leaves, your mother passes away, your grandparents adopt your brother, decide not to adopt you, and then your foster father doesn't like you and wants nothing to do with you and refuses to actually allow you into his family.
Yeah, he doesn't even want to adopt you. Like, it's so messed up. So even though the Allan name got placed between Edgar and Poe, it was a name given with reservations by the foster father and was ultimately rejected, as I mentioned, by a young man made to feel he had never been fully accepted.
Right.
Edgar had an aching need for unconditional love and had been taken in by a man incapable of either recognizing that need or providing it.
Or just didn't even care to recognize it. Not even incapable, just didn't care to even try.
Yeah. Didn't care. No, yeah. This was obviously a horrible connection that we just explored. Losing his mother, separated from his siblings, and outcast the older Edgar got, the more the emotional gulf and bitterness between Allan and Poe grew.
Yeah, there's no way you're going to be healing that sort of relationship as he gets older. He's only going to get more defiant against him. It's not going to happen.
No, it's getting worse. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And it's so sad because the young Poe was described by his Richmond neighbors as, quote, a lovely little fellow with dark curls and brilliant eyes, dressed like a young prince, and charming everyone by his childish grace, vivacity, and cleverness.
And what's probably happening is Allan is probably seeing people react to him positively and describe him like this, and probably giving himself credit for it.
Probably.
Like, that's probably exactly what's happening.
And yeah, and it's just like, by all accounts, like real Richmond neighbors, this is a good little boy. He didn't deserve to never be fully accepted by the man who was supposed to bring him into his home. And already exhibiting a great curiosity and flair for the dramatic, traits that he would nurture throughout his life, he was not dissuaded by the Allans from performing for amused and enchanted viewers. He would recite passages from poems that he had committed to memory. So he's very smart, first of all, reciting and committing them to memory. And second of all, he's receiving incredibly mixed messages from Allan, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, that relationship, it seems like Allan just doomed it from the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And even if there was any attempt at repairing it in any way, it wouldn't be well received, I imagine.
No. And for all of this that he enjoyed, he was denied the emotional stability of a consistently close, reliable parental relationship. There was a distance between each of the Allens and Edgar. Fanny adored him, and it was not her fault. But true to another misfortune for Poe, she had frequent illnesses and periods of confinement.
Mm.
The only one who wants him there is confined to her bed because she's ill. Again,
Right.
you're seeing it again. And we've already addressed Alan, but it is known that he viewed himself more as a benefactor than a father.
Yeah, that's why I feel like he was probably taking credit for people liking Edgar.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And like he that was his doing, raising him, even though he made it clear that he wasn't raising him.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought when you said that. I was like, yeah, because he thinks he's a benefactor. And I think that is so messed up.
Oh, yeah.
To just see yourself as more of a benefactor than a father when you've adopted a 3-year-old boy and taken him into your home. Well, you didn't adopt him. You consciously chose not to.
Well, especially like you're opening your door to help a child in need when you've been through the exact process before, and you don't provide at least similar support as to what you received.
Right. You've been in the same situation, and yet you're just going to preach to him about different sermons of servitude and dependency, and I hate this guy.
And it's such an important thing as a foster parent or an adoptive parent to be supportive and to give a good life, as good as possible, to the child, who, because they're already in a terrible situation. Like, why make it any worse? I've had friends who have been adopted. I have friends who are adopting, like going through all the process, and it's like I can't imagine any one of them ever doing that, or even just my friends who have been adopted, like their parents not
just
supporting
taking a child in and refusing to adopt them, and refusing them to call them your son or your heir. Like, I understand if you don't want to rewrite your will, but you're not calling him your son, you're not adopting him, you're just bringing him into your home so he can feel like an outsider. It's horrible.
Well, I also understand, like, being a foster parent versus being an adoptive parent. Like, those can be two different things. You can foster to adopt, like that's absolutely a thing as well. But especially if you are considering yourself to be a foster parent, you really need to be there in those moments, because those are transitionary moments until an adoption happens, when they would leave. Like, if you are wanting to be a foster parent and you're not wanting to adopt, and you want this title of only being a foster parent, you better be there for all of it. And you better work really hard to make sure that kid is having the best time he can, given whatever his situation may be.
Yeah, especially when you're going all around town talking about what a helper you are to the indigent. And I had a quote further up that I already can't remember, but they were well known around town for making it known that they were helping the poor and the unfortunate.
Right. Like, he's lucky that Edgar turned out the way he did.
Yeah.
Like, he's very lucky, because it wasn't because of him.
No, it wasn't because of him. But one thing he did do is make good on the promise that Edgar would receive an education.
Good.
The day after his 5th birthday, he was attending the Richmond School, run by William Ewing, who would describe him as, quote, a charming boy. As Edgar's education began, the War of 1812 was in full swing. And Allen seemed to see this as an opportunity when the hostilities with Britain ended in February 1815. Allen moved quickly to open a London office of one of his businesses. That May, He paid $2 for a new suit of clothes for Edgar. In June, he auctioned off many of the family's household and personal items. And on the 22nd, he wrote to Charles Ellis, instructing him to sell Scipio, a slave, for $600 and hire other slaves out at $50 a year. So he's also a slave owner, so he sucks.
Yes, I'm not terribly surprised, but again, 1800s of it all.
God, he sucks. And the next day, the family boarded the steamship Lothair, and 6-year-old Edgar wanted it noted he was, quote, not afraid of coming across the sea, end quote. Fanny had good reason to be, though, and the 34-day voyage from Norfolk to Liverpool did little to help.
I'm sure if she's sick and bedridden a lot, that has
sick.
to be so hard.
She's sick, and you're taking her on a 34-day boat trip?
Yeah, and that's not like a comfy trip. That's not like a cruise ship nowadays.
No. And it's, again, the 1800s. It's full of sick, dirty, germy, contagious people. And she's already sick. So on July 28th, they reached their destination and they settled in London. So we've moved again.
I would make that move. That's okay. I'll go to London. I would do that.
Okay, now, but a 34-day boat voyage?
That's a long time, but honestly, I have always wanted to take a boat from the US to the UK. Always wanted to do it. I think that would be such a cool trip.
Then you would like the voyage, and you would end up in London. You love London.
Yeah, I love London.
Fanny was not as juiced.
Say 34 days is a lot. I don't know if I want to do 34 days worth. But I think that would be a really cool trip to take and actually take a boat across to London.
Yeah. And there's so much I had to leave out. Like, poor Sam has been waiting for me for this one because I've been having to edit and include and exclude and what goes where. There's so much I have to leave out. But Fanny, not only was she not juiced because of the 34-day voyage, she was not juiced because she did not want to live in London.
Yeah, see, that's a big deal. That's a big move if you don't want to go.
Exactly. She went because her husband was trying to buy up a business and make a big profit off the war. And so she moved. Poor woman. It said in the book she missed her friends, she missed her family. Like, it by all accounts, she hated it.
Oh, poor Fanny.
But, yeah, I know. Damn. Like, what did the women in this story ever do to anybody?
Right.
So, in April 1816, enrolled as Edgar Allan, and assumed by most to be the Allans' adopted son, Edgar entered Chelsea boarding school. In 1818, he switched to the Manor House boarding school run by Reverend John Bransby. It was here Edgar's gift for languages blossomed. He excelled at Latin and Greek. Bransby would describe him as, quote, intelligent, wayward, and willful, which I like. And so we're going to enter the world again of mixed messages. Because these marks in school and continued praise by the professors, teachers, seemed to warm Allan up. And in March 1818, and on other occasions, he would write home and describe with pride Edgar's achievements. So it's exactly what you said before. He thinks he's doing it. Like, but it's another mixed message to a young boy. You know? But it's because he thinks he's doing it.
Oh, yeah. He's the one who made him the promise of, you'll go to school.
Get an
well,
education.
Look at him. Yeah. Look at what he's doing in school.
Yeah. Look how good he is at school. Thank God I put him there, right? You know?
Exactly.
Gross. At this time, Poe scholar J. Gerald Kennedy noted, they're living near the British Museum. He's surrounded by antiquities, Egyptian mummies, the church with the churchyard where Bransbury took the boys to hear the weekly sermon. It's also during this time that there's the first senses of a youthful alienation. This is going to deepen as he gets older, end quote. So I do see all that. I mean, like it's cool because I've been to London, so I can picture the neighborhood.
I say
like,
I'm
by
picturing
the
like, oh
British
yeah, being by the
Museum.
British Museum. Yeah, I was thinking the same
And
thing. I'm like
how,
walking around the streets.
yeah, and how all that imagery must have affected him, like, and been good for him. But also, it's like, this youthful alienation is going to, unfortunately, because he's receiving nothing from the adults around him.
Yeah, he's not getting support. He's just doing this on his own, which is what Alan kind of wanted.
Yeah.
But Alan can't really be credited for it as he's taking the credit.
Yeah, Alan wants all the credit for what Edgar does. But Alan wants to be Edgar's benefactor and not his father. So you don't get to take credit. Like, screw you, dude. Screw him. And after the collapse of the London tobacco market made Alan's business failure inevitable, he was saddled with inventory he couldn't sell and mounting debts. It was time to admit defeat, and they headed home. The Allens retained the Richmond part of the business, and it might still be saved. That's why they kept it.
Yeah.
And they left England in June 1820, boarding the Martha at Liverpool for a 31-day voyage to New York.
Yeah, that's a long time to be on a boat.
Yeah. They arrived back and settled in a friend's house on August 2nd. And Edgar, again, was using the last name of Poe, enrolling in the school of Joseph H. Clark.
That's interesting that, like, they switch in the UK.
I find that interesting, too. I think that it's telling of his relationship with Alan at different periods.
Yeah. I think Alan was attempting to make more of an image of that, of Edgar. But when he had to return back home, you know what? You have to go back to the original story.
Yeah. And when he's excelling in school and everything and all that, of course he's an Allan Poe. But now that we're back in America, you're just Edgar Poe again. And also, I'd just like to highlight, we've moved again to another state. Again, New York. We're in New York now. Lord. And so he's enrolled in another school. Again, keeping that promise. He's getting educated. It was said 11-year-old Edgar arrived feeling more than a little vain about his travels and English education, both of which made him feel superior to the boys around him.
I can kind of see that at that age.
Oh, yeah, 11. Yeah. He also returned an aspiring poet, which impressed the headmaster. To Clark, Edgar's, quote, nature was entirely free from selfishness, the predominant quality of boyhood, end quote.
That's a nice quote.
I know. A lovely thing to say about somebody. This prompted Edgar, who Clark thought was a prodigy, to show him a collection of poems that he wished to have published. Clark disagreed, though, and he advised Alan against having them published. I told him Edgar was of very excitable temperament, that he possessed a great deal of self-esteem, and that it would be very injurious to the boy to allow him to be flattered and talked about as the author of a printed book at his age.
I have issues with that, but I'm also kind of relieved that he didn't publish it, because Alan would have taken the credit and reaped the benefits. It wouldn't have been Edgar. But I also think stifling Edgar is not a good thing either.
I have complicated things about it too, because I think you're right. Alan would have taken all the credit. I think the work wouldn't have been as phenomenal as the work that he did with more maturity.
Yeah.
But I also think that, like, if you call him a prodigy, and he shows you these poems and he wants to be published, and you go to his dad and like tell him no, like, grow up, you're a grown man. Tell the young boy in front of you that maybe he's not ready yet to publish a book.
Yeah, that should be a conversation potentially between the three of you if you do want to involve a parent. Like, that's understandable. But
yes, why does Alan get to make the decision?
Yeah. Especially, of all people, Alan.
Yes, of all people. So Edgar returned to the school the next year at 14, as yet unpublished. In another example of his athleticism, and in denial of his sickliness, fellow student Creed Thomas remembered that it had apparently gotten back to Poe that classmate Miles Selden had told someone Poe was a liar and a rascal.
Oh.
And at this time, these were fighting words.
I was going to say, it sounds like it. A liar and a rascal.
They were fighting words, and it was arranged. It was about to happen, go down. Miles was bigger and heavier, and pummeled Poe for a while, and spectators anticipated an easy victory. However, Edgar was employing a tactic Muhammad Ali would later dub rope-a-dope. He allowed his opponent to flail away, wearing himself out. With the unsuspecting Miles growing tired, Edgar pounced, administering a sound beating and, quote, showing him a few things about the art of fighting.
I like Poe. I like Poe a lot.
I love him. I'm telling you, I love him. And also, like, a 14-year-old boy thing to do. Yeah. And also, them's fighting words. Them's fighting words. And if them's fighting words, it's about to go down. And it did.
Yeah, just like having the tactic of like the way he was going to beat him.
Very tactical. Very tactical. He was like, I can take a beating for a little bit, and then this guy is going to get trounced.
Right.
So, despite his achievements in school and athletics, Edgar still lived in a class-conscious society. He would be accepted, but only so far, just such as Alan treated him. John S.L. Preston recalled, quote, boys will unconsciously bear about the odor of their father's notions, good or bad. Of Edgar Poe, it was known that his parents had been players, and that he was dependent upon the bounty that is bestowed as an adopted son. All this had the effect of making the boys decline his leadership, and looking back, I fancy it gave him a fierceness he otherwise would not have had. End quote.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So factually, he's not even being bestowed the bounty of being an adopted son. Alan never adopted him.
No, but that image is there.
But it did give him, like, the being looked down on did only give him the fierceness that he had.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this for Poe was like he was able to build like resilience to the way that people treated him.
Mm-hmm.
But with all of that, like you, unfortunately, and we're kind of still like this to this day, at least in some aspects of being in different classes. And it's hard to get past that despite everything else. Like everything else can be perfectly in line, but that's the one barrier that you can't get past.
Chris Sentner, curator of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, said of class, quote, the planter class, which gave us so many of our first presidents, was still on top in terms of status in Virginia. And Poe aspired to be part of that class. These planter class members would still look at those in the merchant class with some suspicion and looks down on them. The teenage Edgar responds to this with a duality that sets in motion a pattern we see again and again throughout his life. He begins to romanticize the role of the loner, taking on the imperious stance that was noted. The dynamic and free-thinking poet Lord Byron increasingly becomes a hero and role model to him. He views himself as separated from the masses, not by class, but by intellect, sensitivity, and genius. Yet at the same time, he craves a place in the august circles where he is granted admittance, but never full acceptance. He is, at the same time, as Sempner notes, an insider allowed to participate and observe to some extent, and an outsider made to feel he's not truly of those worlds.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I see how, especially when it comes to classes, especially given this time period, like classes were incredibly important.
Yeah.
You did not go outside of your class. Mm-hmm. And that made it really hard to transition between classes, which is obviously Edgar's goal. But I understand that like you're invited into it. You kind of have to be to enter the next class. And despite like the invite, you're always an outsider because you were born and bred within that class. So I get that. I understand
exactly
kind of what he's saying here.
Yeah, because he's just, it's just sad because he's just looking through the window, you know, like he's able to be there, but he's not able to be a part of it. And he feels that way in so many other areas of his life.
Yeah.
So this is where I'm going to leave us today. We've touched on the most common and repetitious themes in Poe's life going forward. The loss of several important figures to him, his cold and dreadful relationship with the man who should have been a father to him, and foreshadowed some of what will ultimately cause Poe's death. I am most happy, though, that we've debunked several Poe myths and plan to continue to in part 2. Sam, any final thoughts?
I'm just excited for part 2. I feel like I know the most about his death, which is also basically nothing. So I'm really interested to kind of hear the real story of the couple things that I do know, because they're probably not right in reality.
Well, he's tricky. We learned that today. Learned that today. He's tricky. You could have read as much as you wanted, and who knows. But I think the latter half of his life and his death is more recognizable and details. People know a little bit more about it. But once again, reading that book, there are so many theories about what could have happened here.
Yeah, I feel like we would be friends. That is odd to say, especially like we had such like a parasocial sidetrack earlier. But like, just like if we were to meet, like I feel like like he'd be probably a pretty cool person to hang out with.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow our show on Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye!